The moment you decide you already know someone's story is often the moment you stop seeing the truth. Saturday mornings always brought extra traffic to the Maple Grove Shopping Center. Families pushed grocery carts across wide parking lanes, children laughed as they hurried toward the bakery, and shopping bags filled the trunks of vehicles parked beneath rows of tall maple trees. The warm sunlight reflected across polished windshields while shopping carts rattled softly over the pavement, creating the familiar soundtrack of an ordinary weekend. Nothing about the morning suggested that within a few minutes, one simple misunderstanding would become a lesson remembered by everyone who witnessed it. Near the far end of the parking lot, a silver luxury sedan rested beneath the shade of an old oak tree. An elderly black woman carrying 2 reusable grocery bags walked toward it with slow but steady steps. She wore a neatly pressed light blue cardigan over a floral dress, comfortable walking shoes, and a simple pearl necklace that had clearly been treasured for many years. Her silver hair framed a warm face marked more by kindness than by age. Her name was Evelyn Brooks, although no one nearby recognized her. She smiled politely at a young couple struggling to organize groceries in the back of their vehicle before reaching into her handbag for her keys. As the electronic lock clicked and the sedan's lights flashed, she opened the driver's door with quiet familiarity. Before she could place her grocery bags inside, a sharp but controlled voice interrupted the peaceful moment. "Ma'am, please step away from the vehicle." Evelyn turned slowly to see a uniformed city police officer walking toward her with measured confidence. Officer Brandon Cole adjusted the radio on his shoulder while keeping his attention fixed on the sedan. He had been assigned to extra patrols around shopping centers after several recent reports of vehicle thefts. His experience told him to investigate anything that seemed unusual, and in that instant he believed he was doing exactly what his badge required. Evelyn remained calm. "Good morning, officer," she said gently. "Is something wrong?" Brandon stopped a few feet away and glanced at the luxury sedan before looking back at Evelyn. "I need to verify that this vehicle belongs to you." Evelyn looked briefly at the car, then back at the officer. There was no fear in her eyes and no sign of irritation. "It certainly does," she answered politely. Brandon nodded but did not relax. "Would you mind showing me identification and proof of ownership?" Around them, several shoppers slowed their pace, quietly noticing the unexpected conversation. A supermarket employee collecting shopping carts paused for a moment before continuing toward the entrance. An elderly man loading groceries into his pickup truck looked over curiously but remained where he was. Evelyn carefully set her grocery bags on the pavement before reaching into her purse. "Of course," she replied with complete cooperation. "I am happy to help." As she searched for her wallet, Brandon studied the vehicle once more, convinced that caution justified every decision he was making. Evelyn removed her driver's license and registration with steady hands before offering them to him. "Thank you," Brandon said while examining the documents. Everything appeared valid at first glance, yet something continued to trouble him even though he could not explain exactly why. Evelyn quietly watched his expression without saying another word. Then, after several silent seconds, she asked one simple question in a calm, respectful voice. "Officer, before we go any further, are you absolutely certain this is the conclusion you wish to reach before knowing the whole story?" Brandon looked up from the registration card and met her eyes. Behind him, another patrol vehicle slowly entered the parking lot as the ordinary Saturday morning continued around them, unaware that the next few minutes would quietly change far more than either of them could possibly imagine. SUA, Evelyn Brooks remained exactly where she was, her reusable grocery bags resting neatly beside the silver sedan while Officer Brandon Cole carefully examined the driver's license and registration card she had handed him only moments before. Around them, the shopping center continued its familiar weekend routine. Families crossed the parking lot pushing carts filled with groceries, children pointed excitedly toward the ice cream shop across the street, and the distant sound of shopping cart wheels echoed across the pavement. To everyone passing by, the conversation appeared to be nothing more than another routine police interaction. Only Evelyn understood that ordinary moments often revealed extraordinary truths about the people involved. Brandon studied the registration twice before looking back at the luxury sedan. Everything appeared to match. The vehicle identification number listed on the registration corresponded to the information displayed on his patrol computer. The driver's license was current. There were no outstanding warrants, no restrictions, and no alerts attached to Evelyn's record. Yet something continued to make him hesitate. Experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and at that moment he believed caution required additional questions. Evelyn quietly watched his expression without showing the slightest frustration. Years of teaching elementary school had given her remarkable patience. She had spent decades encouraging nervous children to slow down, think carefully, and never rush toward conclusions before understanding the full story. Those lessons had never left her. Brandon handed the registration back, but kept the driver's license for another moment. "Ma'am," he said, "how long have you owned this vehicle?" Evelyn answered with a gentle smile. "Almost 4 years." Brandon nodded thoughtfully. "Did you purchase it yourself?" Evelyn looked briefly toward the sedan before answering. "It was a gift from my family after I retired." The answer seemed straightforward, yet Brandon continued studying the vehicle as though searching for something that would confirm the questions still forming in his mind. A supermarket employee collecting shopping carts slowed nearby, quietly observing the conversation before returning to work. An elderly couple loading groceries into their pickup truck exchanged curious glances, but continued organizing their bags. The parking lot remained peaceful, though several people had begun noticing the unusual amount of attention focused on one elderly shopper. At that moment, another patrol vehicle rolled slowly into the shopping center parking lot before stopping several spaces away. Officer Melissa Grant stepped out to complete a routine patrol check and noticed Brandon speaking with Evelyn beside the silver sedan. She remained at a respectful distance, allowing her colleague to continue without interruption while quietly observing the interaction. Brandon looked once more at Evelyn's identification before asking another question. "Do you have the insurance card with you as well?" Evelyn reached calmly into her purse and handed it to him without hesitation. Every requested document matched perfectly. Every answer remained consistent. Every movement reflected complete cooperation. Melissa quietly noticed the same thing. She also noticed something else. Evelyn never once raised her voice, argued, or questioned Brandon's authority. Instead, she answered each request with remarkable dignity. Brandon returned the insurance card, but still appeared uncertain. Evelyn folded her hands gently over her purse and looked toward the nearby security camera mounted above the supermarket entrance before returning her attention to Brandon. "Officer," she said softly, "sometimes the most important part of any conversation is not the question we ask. It is whether we are willing to listen carefully to the answer." Brandon considered her words, but remained silent. Just then, a cell phone resting inside Evelyn's handbag began to ring. She glanced at the screen, smiled warmly as though recognizing the caller immediately, and politely asked, "Would you mind if I answered? My son has a habit of checking on me every Saturday morning." Evelyn Brooks looked at the name displayed on her phone for only a second before answering with the same gentle smile she seemed to offer everyone she met. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said warmly. Her voice carried the calm affection of a mother who had repeated those words thousands of times over the years. Officer Brandon Cole instinctively stepped back a respectful distance, allowing her to take the call while still remaining close enough to continue the conversation afterward. Around them, the Saturday crowd continued flowing between the grocery store, the pharmacy, and nearby restaurants as if nothing unusual were happening. Shopping carts rolled across the pavement, children laughed near the entrance, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery inside the market. Evelyn listened quietly for a moment before answering. "Yes, I finished my shopping. I am still in the parking lot." She paused again, glancing briefly toward Brandon before continuing. "Everything is all right. An officer is simply making sure everything is in order." Her tone remained reassuring, never suggesting frustration or complaint. Brandon noticed the choice of words immediately. She could have described the situation differently. She could have sounded upset or embarrassed. Instead, she chose kindness. On the other end of the call, Her son asked another question that caused Evelyn to smile once more. "No, you do not need to worry," she replied softly. "I know you are busy this morning. We can talk later." She listened for another moment before adding, "Drive safely." "I love you too." The call ended, and she carefully returned the phone to her handbag. Brandon cleared his throat before speaking again. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am." Evelyn nodded. Patience usually gives people the opportunity to understand one another. Officer Melissa Grant, still observing from several yards away, quietly appreciated the dignity with which Evelyn handled every moment of the interaction. She had watched countless traffic stops and citizen contacts throughout her career, yet it was rare to see someone remain so composed while being questioned. Brandon returned Evelyn's driver's license and looked once more toward the silver sedan. Every document remained consistent. Every record was accurate. Yet the lingering uncertainty that had prompted the encounter still had not completely disappeared from his mind. He reached for the shoulder microphone attached to his uniform. "Dispatch," he said calmly, "can you confirm the registered owner information one more time?" The dispatcher acknowledged the request and began reviewing the registration database again. Evelyn quietly adjusted one of the grocery bags resting beside her feet before looking toward the supermarket entrance, where a security camera overlooked the parking lot. Years of experience had taught her that ordinary moments often became important later, even when no one realized it at the time. Nearby, several shoppers slowed briefly before continuing on their way. An elderly veteran carrying a small American flag pin on his cap watched the interaction for a few seconds before respectfully moving along. Nothing about the parking lot suggested drama. Everything appeared peaceful, orderly, and routine. Yet beneath the quiet conversation, something else was beginning to unfold. Several miles away, a black sport utility vehicle bearing county government plates turned onto the highway after leaving a community outreach event earlier than scheduled. Inside sat County Police Chief David Brooks, reviewing notes for an afternoon leadership meeting. His phone rested on the passenger seat beside a folder labeled Community Trust Initiative. He smiled as he remembered speaking with his mother only minutes earlier, never imagining that the ordinary Saturday morning they had both expected was about to bring them together in a way neither of them could possibly have predicted. Evelyn Brooks remained beside the silver sedan while Officer Brandon Cole listened to the update coming through his shoulder radio. The dispatcher confirmed once again that the registration matched the driver's license perfectly. The vehicle was legally registered to Evelyn Brooks. There were no theft reports, no ownership disputes, and no outstanding alerts connected to either the vehicle or its owner. The information was clear, yet Brandon found himself studying the luxury sedan one more time as though searching for an explanation that the computer had somehow overlooked. Officer Melissa Grant quietly approached from the neighboring patrol vehicle, careful not to interrupt but close enough to hear the dispatcher repeat the same confirmation a second time. She glanced at Brandon before asking in a calm voice, "Everything comes back clean?" Brandon nodded slowly. "Yes, everything matches." Melissa looked toward Evelyn, who continued standing patiently beside her grocery bags, waiting for the conversation to reach its natural conclusion. "Then what are we still trying to verify?" she asked gently. Brandon hesitated. He did not have an answer that sounded as convincing now as it had only a few minutes earlier. The parking lot continued moving around them without interruption. A family loaded bottled water into the back of a minivan. A teenager returned shopping carts to the collection area. An elderly couple crossed the driving lane together, smiling as they shared a paper bag filled with fresh pastries. The ordinary rhythm of the weekend seemed almost untouched by the quiet uncertainty unfolding beside the silver sedan. Evelyn noticed Brandon's expression soften slightly. She smiled kindly before speaking again. "Officer, I taught children for more than 40 years. Sometimes the hardest lesson was learning that asking one more question is often better than holding on to the first answer." Brandon looked at her with genuine curiosity. "You were a teacher?" Evelyn nodded. "Second grade for most of my career." Children have a wonderful way of reminding adults not to assume they already know everything. Melissa smiled faintly, appreciating the quiet wisdom in the conversation. Brandon carefully handed every document back to Evelyn. Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am. Evelyn accepted them with steady hands and placed them back inside her handbag. Before either officer could say anything further, the distant sound of another vehicle turning into the shopping center drew several heads toward the entrance. A black county government sport utility vehicle entered the parking lot at a normal speed before stopping several rows away. The official county emblem was visible on the front door, though most shoppers paid little attention as they continued loading groceries into their cars. Brandon glanced briefly toward the arriving vehicle before returning his attention to Evelyn. He assumed another county employee had simply stopped to shop on the weekend. Melissa quietly recognized the county government plates, but thought little of them at first. The driver's door opened, and a tall man wearing business attire stepped out carrying a leather portfolio beneath one arm. He paused for a brief moment, scanning the parking lot before his eyes settled on the familiar silver sedan parked beneath the oak tree. Without urgency, but with unmistakable purpose, he began walking toward Evelyn. She noticed him almost immediately, her face brightening with the warm smile only a mother gives her child. Neither Brandon nor Melissa yet understood why the elderly woman suddenly looked so completely at ease, but within the next few moments, the ordinary Saturday morning was about to reveal a truth that would change the meaning of every decision made since the conversation beside the silver sedan had begun. Evelyn Brooks set her grocery bags gently beside the silver sedan as the tall man crossed the parking lot with calm, purposeful steps. He wore a dark navy business suit without a uniform, carried a leather portfolio beneath one arm, and greeted several shoppers with polite nods as he walked. There was nothing dramatic about his arrival. The quiet confidence in his posture came from years of leadership rather than the need to display authority. When he reached the edge of the parking space, his attention went immediately to Evelyn. A warm smile appeared across his face, replacing the serious expression he had carried only moments before. "Mom," he said with genuine concern, "are you all right?" Evelyn smiled back with the same quiet affection she had shown during the phone call earlier that morning. "I am perfectly fine, sweetheart," she answered. "These officers have been asking questions, and we have been having a respectful conversation." The single word, "Mom," settled over the parking lot more heavily than anyone expected. Officer Brandon Cole looked from Evelyn to the man standing beside her, trying to understand what he had just heard. Officer Melissa Grant recognized the county seal embroidered on the man's portfolio before her eyes widened slightly. She had attended enough regional meetings to recognize County Police Chief David Brooks immediately. Brandon followed her gaze, then looked back toward David with growing uncertainty. David extended his hand toward both officers with calm professionalism. "Good morning," he said. "I am David Brooks. Thank you for looking out for the community." There was no irritation in his voice and no hint of accusation. Brandon accepted the handshake, visibly surprised. "Chief Brooks," he said quietly, "I did not realize." David gently interrupted him with a polite smile. "That is understandable. You were not expected to recognize my mother." He glanced toward Evelyn before continuing. "The more important question is whether any citizen should need to be recognized before receiving patience and respect." His words carried no hostility, only quiet reflection. Melissa nodded thoughtfully, immediately understanding the lesson hidden within the conversation. Brandon remained silent for several seconds before looking toward Evelyn. Every document she had provided had been accurate. Every answer she had given had been truthful. Every request from the officers had been met with complete cooperation. Yet despite all of that, he realized he had continued searching for reasons to doubt what the evidence had already confirmed. David noticed the realization crossing the young officer's face. "Every one of us makes decisions under pressure," he said calmly. "Leadership is not about pretending mistakes never happen. It is about recognizing them early enough to learn from them." Evelyn reached over and gently rested one hand on her son's arm. "That is exactly what I taught you when you were a little boy," she said with a soft laugh. David smiled warmly. "You certainly did." Around them, shoppers quietly returned to their weekend routines. The supermarket employee resumed collecting shopping carts. Families continued loading groceries into their vehicles. The ordinary rhythm of the parking lot slowly returned. Yet for Brandon and Melissa, the morning would never again feel quite so ordinary. Without anyone raising a voice or demanding special treatment, a simple family greeting had transformed an ordinary encounter into a lesson about fairness, humility, and the responsibility carried by every batch. David looked once more toward the silver sedan before turning back to the officers. "If you have a few minutes after my mother gets home safely," he said with quiet sincerity, "perhaps we can continue this conversation together. I believe it could help all of us become even better at serving this community." Evelyn Brooks thanked her son for stopping by before gently picking up her grocery bags. "I will be home before lunch," she said with the same reassuring smile that had guided him through childhood. David Brooks nodded warmly. "Drive carefully, Mom." After watching her settle comfortably into the silver sedan and leave the parking lot, David turned his full attention back to Officer Brandon Cole and Officer Melissa Grant. There was no anger in his expression, only the calm seriousness expected from someone responsible for leading an entire county police department. "Would the two of you walk with me for a few minutes?" he asked politely. Brandon immediately agreed. Melissa followed beside them as they moved toward a quiet corner of the shopping center parking lot away from passing customers. David rested his portfolio on the hood of his county vehicle before speaking. "I appreciate that you responded professionally and remained respectful throughout the encounter. You requested identification. You verified the registration. You maintained a calm tone. Those are important parts of the job." Brandon listened carefully, surprised that the chief had begun with what had gone well instead of what had gone wrong. David continued, "What concerns me is not procedure. It is what happened after the evidence answered your questions." Brandon lowered his eyes for a moment before responding honestly. "Chief Brooks, every document confirmed the vehicle belonged to your mother. I should have allowed the facts to replace my initial assumptions sooner. Instead, I kept searching for a different explanation." David nodded slowly. "That is exactly the lesson. Every officer develops instincts over time. Instinct can help us notice details, but instinct must never become stronger than evidence." Melissa quietly added, "The dispatcher confirmed everything twice." Looking back, that should have been the moment the conversation changed. David looked at both officers with steady confidence. Good policing depends on two things working together: good judgment and good humility. The moment we believe our first impression matters more than verified information, we risk treating people unfairly without even realizing it. Brandon took a slow breath before speaking again. "I understand now that I was trying to prove my first conclusion instead of allowing the facts to guide my decision. I regret that." David smiled gently, not because the mistake had happened, but because the lesson had been accepted. Acknowledging that truth is how professional growth begins. He pointed toward the security cameras mounted along the shopping center buildings. Every interaction today was documented. That protects citizens. It also protects officers willing to learn honestly from their decisions. Brandon looked toward the cameras, then back at the chief. "Will this become part of a formal review?" David answered immediately. "It will become part of a professional learning review, exactly as any significant public interaction should. Accountability exists to improve organizations, not simply to assign blame." The words settled quietly between them. Nearby, families continued carrying groceries to their vehicles while shopping carts rolled across the pavement. Life moved forward without interruption. David closed his portfolio before offering his hand to Brandon, then to Melissa. Both officers accepted the handshake with genuine respect. "My mother taught me something when I was younger," David said softly. "She always reminded me that every stranger is carrying a story you have not heard yet. Our responsibility is to leave room for that story before deciding who they are." Brandon nodded slowly. He realized that the greatest lesson of the morning had not come from meeting the county police chief. It had come from meeting the woman who had taught him how real leadership begins long before anyone knows your name. Early Monday morning, County Police Headquarters looked much like every other government building preparing for a new week. Patrol vehicles filled the parking lot, officers greeted one another in the hallway, and the familiar sound of radios blended with quiet conversations as employees prepared for the daily command briefing. Yet inside the main conference room, the atmosphere carried an unusual sense of anticipation. County Police Chief David Brooks had invited supervisors, field training officers, and patrol representatives to attend a special leadership session before the regular meeting began. Officer Brandon Cole and Officer Melissa Grant quietly took seats near the middle of the room, both carrying notebooks instead of the usual briefing folders. Neither knew exactly what the chief planned to discuss, although both suspected the previous Saturday's encounter would become part of the conversation. A few moments later, David entered carrying only a leather portfolio and a small framed photograph. He greeted everyone with his usual warmth before placing the picture on the conference table where every person could see it. The photograph showed a much younger David standing beside his mother outside an elementary school on the day he graduated from the police academy. Evelyn smiled proudly while placing his first badge into his hand. The room remained silent as David looked around at the officers before speaking. "Every one of us remembers the people who shaped our understanding of right and wrong," he began. "For me, that person has always been my mother." He paused briefly before continuing. "She never taught me how to become a police chief. She taught me how to become the kind of person worthy of wearing a badge." Brandon immediately recognized the photograph. David gently picked it up before continuing. "When I was a child, my mother often reminded me that every stranger deserves the benefit of our patience before they deserve the weight of our assumptions. At the time, I believed she was simply teaching kindness. Years later, I realized she was teaching professional judgment." Several supervisors quietly nodded. David then described the parking lot encounter exactly as it had happened, focusing not on personalities, but on decisions. He praised Brandon and Melissa for remaining respectful throughout the interaction, while also explaining how easily first impressions can quietly influence even experienced officers. "Good policing begins with observation," he said. "Great policing begins when observation is followed by careful verification instead of immediate conclusions." Brandon listened with complete attention. Nothing in the chief's words felt like public criticism. Instead, every sentence felt like an invitation to become a better officer. David then turned toward the large display screen behind him where photographs from community outreach events appeared one after another. Children waving beside patrol cars. Elderly residents attending neighborhood safety meetings. Officers helping families after severe storms. Every one of these moments began with trust, David explained. "Trust is not created because people recognize our names or our ranks. Trust begins when every citizen believes they will be treated fairly before we know anything about who they are." The room remained completely quiet. Melissa wrote one sentence across the top of her notebook. "Let evidence replace assumptions." Brandon quietly wrote the same words beneath it. David closed the portfolio before looking once more around the room. "The public may never remember every report we write or every case we solve," he said. "They will always remember how we made them feel during the ordinary moments that never appear in headlines. That is where the reputation of this department is truly built, one respectful conversation at a time." Over the following weeks, the lesson from that quiet Saturday morning spread far beyond a single shopping center parking lot. County Police Chief David Brooks asked every patrol division to dedicate part of its weekly briefing to communication, respectful first contact, and evidence-based decision-making. The goal was not to replace existing policies. Those policies already existed. The goal was to strengthen the habits that determined how those policies came to life during ordinary encounters with ordinary people. Supervisors began riding alongside newer officers more frequently, not simply to evaluate technical performance, but to observe how conversations began before any enforcement decision was made. Officer Brandon Cole volunteered to participate in several community meetings where residents shared their expectations and concerns about everyday interactions with law enforcement. Instead of defending every decision, he listened carefully. He discovered that many people judged an entire department by the first 60 seconds of a single conversation. That realization stayed with him long after each meeting ended. Officer Melissa Grant joined him during neighborhood outreach events, helping organize informal gatherings where officers answered questions over coffee instead of standing behind podiums. The conversations were honest, respectful, and often surprisingly encouraging. One afternoon, several weeks after the shopping center encounter, Brandon was dispatched to assist an elderly woman whose vehicle had stalled outside a local pharmacy. As he arrived, he noticed she appeared anxious while searching through her purse for paperwork. Without rushing to conclusions, he greeted her with a calm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Officer Brandon Cole. How can I help you today?" The woman explained that the car had simply stopped running while she was trying to leave the parking space. Brandon listened carefully before examining the situation. Within minutes, he confirmed that the problem was mechanical rather than anything requiring enforcement. He contacted roadside assistance, helped move the vehicle to a safer location, and remained nearby until help arrived. Before leaving, the woman thanked him warmly. "You treated me with kindness before you even knew my name," she said. Brandon smiled quietly, recognizing the lesson immediately. "Everyone deserves that," he answered. Later that evening, he entered a brief note into his daily activity log. It contained no mention of citations, investigations, or enforcement. It simply recorded one sentence: "Respect changes the outcome before anything else does." At the next command meeting, Chief Brooks reviewed several examples of positive community interactions that had taken place across the department. Rather than focusing only on statistics, he highlighted conversations where patience, listening, and professionalism had prevented unnecessary conflict while strengthening public confidence. The atmosphere inside the department continued to evolve. Officers greeted residents more naturally. Supervisors encouraged thoughtful decision-making instead of hurried conclusions. The changes were gradual, almost invisible from one day to the next, yet together they reshaped the culture of the organization. The lesson that had begun beside a silver sedan no longer belonged to one officer, one family, or one parking lot. It had become part of the department's daily identity. And with each respectful encounter, the values engraved on the headquarters wall became a little less like words carved into stone and a little more like principles carried into every conversation. Several months later, the Maple Grove Shopping Center looked exactly as it always had. Families filled the parking lot on Saturday mornings, shopping carts rolled across the pavement, and children hurried beside their parents carrying fresh flowers, bakery boxes, and grocery bags toward waiting vehicles. Nothing about the surroundings suggested that an ordinary conversation months earlier had quietly changed the culture of an entire police department. Yet the difference revealed itself in moments so small that most people never noticed them. Officer Brandon Cole began every public contact the same way, with a greeting before a question and an explanation before an assumption. Officer Melissa Grant did the same. Those habits gradually spread throughout the patrol division until they no longer felt like new procedures. They simply became the department's normal way of serving the community. On another bright Saturday morning, Evelyn Brooks returned to the same shopping center carrying 2 reusable grocery bags after finishing her weekly shopping. She walked toward the familiar silver sedan parked beneath the same oak tree where everything had begun months before. This time, before she even reached the driver's door, Brandon recognized her from across the parking lot. He smiled warmly and walked over with relaxed confidence. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks," he said politely. "It is good to see you again. May I help you carry those bags?" Evelyn laughed softly and handed him one of the lighter bags. "Thank you, officer. I think I can manage the rest." Together they walked the final few steps to the sedan. Brandon carefully placed the groceries inside before closing the trunk. There were no questions about ownership. No uncertainty. Only ordinary courtesy offered without expectation of recognition or reward. A few moments later, a black county vehicle entered the parking lot. County Police Chief David Brooks stepped out after finishing another community event nearby. He noticed Brandon helping his mother with the groceries before either of them realized he had arrived. David remained where he was for several quiet seconds, simply watching the interaction unfold naturally. Nothing had been staged. Nothing had been arranged. It was simply one officer treating one elderly citizen with patience and respect because that had become his first instinct. When Brandon finally noticed the chief, he greeted him with the same professionalism he had shown Evelyn. David smiled and walked toward them. "Looks like I arrived just in time to see good policing," he said warmly. Brandon smiled modestly. "I think I finally understand what your mother was trying to teach me that morning." Evelyn looked at both men with unmistakable pride. "The lesson was never about who I was," she said gently. "It was about remembering that every person deserves the same kindness before you know anything about their story." David nodded quietly. "That is exactly what leadership should look like." The three stood together for another moment beneath the shade of the old oak tree while the familiar sounds of weekend life continued around them. Families laughed, shopping carts rolled across the pavement, and another ordinary Saturday carried on as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened there. Yet the truth remained. One respectful conversation had quietly changed countless others that would follow. As Evelyn drove home, Brandon returned to patrol, and David headed toward another community meeting. The lesson continued traveling with each of them. Badges would eventually change hands. Assignments would come and go. Titles would be earned and someday retired. But character would remain long after every uniform was folded away. Because in the end, the strongest measure of justice is never found in the authority someone carries. It is found in the respect they choose to give before they know who is standing in front of them.